Welcome to Infinity Learning, where every story, every lesson, and every book opens the door to a wiser, more meaningful life. You're a chicken. Yes, you. You glance around your surroundings and occasionally wonder, why is your owner so kind to you? At first, you're suspicious. You question it. What if he's just fattening you up for the slaughterhouse? You've never seen the place yourself, but you know none of your chicken friends have ever returned from there. So you stay cautious, alert, always anticipating the worst. But the day never comes. Days turn into weeks, weeks into months, eventually years. And now you're convinced your owner must love you. He treats you better than all the other chickens. You believe he'd never harm you. Each day that passes becomes further proof that you'll survive the next. One day, then 2, 10, 100, 1,000 peaceful days, until the 1,001st day. And on that day, everything shatters. Your trust, your belief in safety, your life. You're on someone's dinner plate now. You should have never crossed the road. Imagine how deep the betrayal felt. To be led to the most terrifying place on the farm, right when your trust in your owner was at its highest. Ironically, you trusted him most the moment he betrayed you. Maybe if you hadn't believed you were different, that you were the exception, you could have at least prepared for the end. That single day, the 1,001st, it outweighed the previous 1,000, and not by a little. It destroyed them entirely. This is known as a black swan event, an unexpected occurrence with massive impact, completely altering our perspective. People once believed all swans were white, until they saw a single black swan. One sighting changed the whole belief system. Nassim Nicholas Taleb wrote about this in his book, The Black Swan, The Impact of the Highly Improbable. He explores how unpredictable events shape our world, and how blind we often are to their possibility. Taleb explains that we live in an increasingly complex society, one where rare, extreme outcomes dominate more than we realize. And ironically, the more confident we feel in our forecasts, the more vulnerable we become. Let's take an example. Imagine you're weighing a few thousand people. One of them happens to be the heaviest person on Earth, weighing, say, 2,000 pounds. Sounds extreme, right? But in the grand total, that person barely makes a dent. They might account for less than 0.5% of the total weight. Taleb calls this world mediocristan, where no single outlier dramatically changes the average. Now, switch the experiment. Instead of weight, we measure wealth. This time, one of the individuals is a billionaire. Suddenly, that one person might represent 99% of the total wealth of the group. This is what Taleb calls extremistan, a world where a few outliers dominate the entire distribution. Here's the catch. Our modern world operates less like mediocristan and much more like extremistan. In areas like finance, fame, technology, and media, the gains are heavily concentrated among a small minority. Taleb argues that digital wealth, unlike physical weight, isn't constrained by biology or physics. There's virtually no limit to how much wealth or influence someone can amass. In the same way, musicians, authors, influencers, and CEOs follow this pattern. Most earn very little, while a few gain extraordinary success. That's why our current system is described as winner takes all. But here's the danger. In a world where outliers dominate, predictions become far more fragile. Our models break, assumptions fail. And then comes a black swan to prove just how little we truly understand. You might say, but billionaires worked hard. They earned it. Sure, many did. But how much of their success is skill and how much is luck? If we ran the same simulation again, would the same people rise to the top? Maybe, maybe not. But a few would still become outliers, simply because extremistan rewards randomness. And yet, we rarely hear about the thousands who tried and failed. Their stories don't make it to books or documentaries. This creates a survivorship bias. We only see the winners, so we assume we understand success. As Taleb notes, look at the graveyard. It's silent. The failures don't write memoirs. Here's where it gets even trickier. We tend to prepare for the risks we already understand, but it's the ones we don't see coming that do the real damage. Take 9/11 as an example. After it happened, many experts came out claiming they had seen it coming for years. If so, why weren't cockpit doors reinforced earlier? Why did we allow pocket knives on planes? Why was TSA only invented after the disaster? Because the truth is, they didn't know. Not really. Hindsight bias makes it seem like it was obvious, but it wasn't. If you had proposed bulletproof cockpit doors in 1991, you might have been laughed out of the room. Airline execs would have shown you spreadsheets saying they couldn't afford it. After September 11th, though, everyone agrees it should have been done long ago. The very act of preparing for a past catastrophe creates a false sense of security. We think we've fixed it, but in reality, we've only prepared for the last black swan, not the next one. Taleb warns, the most dangerous risks are the ones we don't see. You might even call this the paradox of knowledge. The more we learn from the past, the more we trick ourselves into thinking the future is predictable. And that, perhaps, is the most fragile illusion of all. Let's now look at where things get even more dangerous. Our false confidence in data. In the world of science and statistics, we often rely on probabilities to predict what's likely to happen. And usually, that's a good thing, but only if the underlying system is stable and well understood, like rolling dice or playing blackjack. The problem? Real life isn't a casino game. In a controlled environment, risk is measurable. But in the real world, systems are messy, interconnected, and constantly evolving. When we apply simple statistical tools to complex problems, we fall into what Taleb calls the ludic fallacy, the mistake of using neat models to understand a chaotic world. Take the 2008 financial crisis. The models used by economists failed catastrophically because they didn't account for the possibility that everyone might panic at once. The risk was underestimated, not because the math was wrong, but because it was built on flawed assumptions. This isn't limited to finance. Look at tech failures, medical predictions, or climate modeling. We're more data-driven than ever before, but often blind to what data can't tell us. Just because we can calculate odds doesn't mean we understand the game we're playing. Now, let's talk about technology and how interconnected our world has become, which, while seemingly a strength, is also a ticking time bomb when it comes to black swan events. Once upon a time, the consequences of failure were localized. If a village's water system broke, it only affected that village. If a king made a poor decision, the consequences rarely spread beyond his borders. But today, a small glitch in code, a misconfigured server, or an unexpected cyber attack can cripple systems across multiple countries. Consider this. In an attempt to block YouTube within its borders, the Pakistani government accidentally shut down YouTube globally for a brief time in 2008. A mistake in one country unintentionally affected millions worldwide. That's the cost of tight interconnectivity. We've built a world that's incredibly efficient, but also frighteningly fragile. Or take the example of coronal mass ejections, massive bursts of solar radiation from the sun. The most powerful one recorded was the Carrington event of 1859, which mostly just disrupted telegraph systems at the time. But if a similar solar storm hit us today, with our dependence on electronics, satellites, GPS, and power grids, the cost would be catastrophic. Trillions in damages and decades to repair. It's not even a far-off fantasy. In 2012, scientists calculated the chance of such an event happening within the next decade was about 12%. Despite that, we're largely unprepared. Why? Because it hasn't happened recently. Because it feels abstract. Because preventing it doesn't win elections. And so, the system stays vulnerable. That's the irony of our modern world. The more advanced and smart we become, the more susceptible we are to breakdowns we barely understand. Even worse, because these events haven't happened yet, we assume they never will. Let's return to the chicken for a moment. For the chicken, slaughter day was a black swan, a total shock that shattered 1,000 days of perceived safety. But for the farmer, it was routine, expected, scheduled. This shows us something profound. Whether something is a black swan depends on your perspective. It's not just about the event itself, it's about the information and awareness leading up to it. Taleb puts it bluntly, our goal should be to live like the butcher, not the chicken. In other words, seek to understand what others don't, to see the unseen, to question what feels too stable. And that brings us to another warning Taleb offers. I worry less about the flashy advertised risks. I worry more about the vicious hidden ones. It's not always the threats that make headlines that should concern us. It's the ones quietly growing in the shadows, unnoticed, until it's too late. And just to clarify, not all black swans are bad. Some are wildly positive. A book written in obscurity becomes a global bestseller. A small startup disrupts an entire industry. A random decision changes the entire course of your life in the best possible way. But whether for better or worse, the nature of the black swan is this. It doesn't follow the rules. It breaks them. And in doing so, it reminds us just how fragile our understanding of the world really is. Taleb goes deeper. He doesn't just warn us about black swans. He explores why we fail to see them coming. At the core is a problem of epistemology, the study of knowledge itself. In simpler terms, we don't just have trouble with events. We have trouble with how we understand the world in the first place. We like to think we're rational, that we understand how things work, that we can spot risk and avoid danger. But the truth, we overestimate what we know and underestimate what we don't. It's what leads us to trust charts, forecasts, and predictive models that look impressive, yet fall apart in the face of reality. It's what makes us believe the future will look like the past, just with better tech. Taleb calls this the narrative fallacy. Our brains love stories. We connect the dots looking backward and create a neat storyline. We convince ourselves that it all made sense, that it was inevitable. But that's hindsight talking. In truth, the chain of cause and effect is rarely so simple. We miss tiny variables. We ignore weak signals. And the one overlooked factor becomes the spark for something massive. This illusion of understanding gives rise to fragile systems, systems that appear sturdy until they're not. We saw this in the 2008 housing collapse, in the fall of seemingly too big to fail companies, in the outbreak of a global pandemic, in wars sparked by a single mistake or miscalculation. And we'll keep seeing it again and again as long as we pretend that the future is knowable, linear, and fair. So, how should we live in a world ruled by black swans? Should we fear the future, hide from randomness, give up on planning altogether? Number Taleb doesn't argue for fear. He argues for humility. Instead of trying to predict the future, he says, we should build systems that can survive the unpredictable. Even better, we should build systems that get stronger from it. He calls this concept anti-fragility. Fragile things break under pressure. Resilient things resist the pressure. But anti-fragile things, they actually benefit from shocks. Think of your muscles. You break them down with exercise, and they grow back stronger. Think of evolution. A random mutation might seem meaningless, until one of them allows a species to survive disaster. That's anti-fragility in action. So, what does it mean to live an anti-fragile life? It means don't over-optimize. Leave room for error, slack, unpredictability. Avoid dependence on forecasts. Instead, prepare for volatility. Diversify your risks. Don't bet everything on a single outcome. Question the obvious, especially when everyone agrees. Learn from failure, not just your own, but the invisible failures of others. Practice humility. Remember, what you don't know is more important than what you think you do. In a world of extremistan, where randomness rules and outliers dominate, the only true wisdom is to embrace uncertainty, not resist it. And maybe that's the real lesson of the chicken. Not that danger is always around the corner, but that trust without awareness is blindness, that certainty is often an illusion, and that the safest way forward is not control, but adaptability. Because in the end, black swans aren't going away. But we can choose to stop being the chicken. Thank you for being here with us at Infinity Learning, where every ending is just the beginning of another journey. Keep learning, keep growing, and we'll see you in the next video.